Animation. It's all around us, in our favorite movies and TV shows, on billboards, in video games, heck, even on calculators. When you think about the term animation studio, what comes to mind? Disney, Warner Bros., MGM? Well, like all things in life, in order to understand how these animation giants came to be, we first have to know how they started. In 1922, Walt Disney and Ub Iwerks created Laugh-O-Gram Films in Kansas City, Missouri. The company was unsuccessful and went out of business in a year. Undeterred, Disney set off to Los Angeles with the last Laugh-O-Gram, Alice's Wonderland, which was picked up by Margaret J. Winkler. The Alice comedies, as they would come to be known, were produced by Winkler's husband Charles Mintz and distributed by Universal Pictures. In 1927, Disney would debut a new character, Oswald the Lucky Rabbit, who was created to test out a relatively new concept at the time called personality animation, where the cartoons were defined by the character's movements and not just the animation. In early 1928, Disney flew over to New York City to meet with Mintz and discuss a raise which could be put into making better Oswalds. Mintz declined Disney's offer and instead hired away all of Disney's animators except Ub Iwerks. Disney and Iwerks left and formed Walt Disney Studio, home of Mickey Mouse, Donald Duck, Goofy, and all the other characters we've come to know and tolerate. In 1937, Disney's studio would take the biggest leap forward for animation by debuting Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Suddenly, cartoons weren't just a thing you put before the movie, now they were the movie. Disney would go on to make 19 more films during his life. However, since he had been smoking since he was 18, Walt Disney passed away in 1966 and the studio plunged into a dark age. In 1929, Hugh Harman, Rudolph Isaac, and the rest of Disney's old crew created a short called Bosco, the Talking Kid, which was picked up by Leon Schlesinger and shown to Warner Brothers, who greenlit a full series. Looney Tunes would begin the following year, and Merry Melodies would be created the year after that. In 1933, Harmonizing's production contract was up for renegotiation, and since the shorts now were costing more to make than they were making, Harmonizing decided to leave Warner Brothers and move to MGM, taking Bosco with them. Leon Schlesinger, on the other hand, decided to make his own Looney Tunes by making his own production company. Leon Schlesinger Productions would hire back a lot of Harmonizing staff and begin pumping out new Looney Tunes. In 1935, Porky Pig debuted. Then in 1937, Daffy Duck. And in 1940, Bugs Bunny started the manic energy that would define the 40s. In 1945, Leon Schlesinger retired and sold his studio to Warner Brothers, who would rename it Warner Brothers Cartoons. In 1964, Warner Brothers shut down the studio, but new cartoons would still be made with help from DePatie Frelick Enterprises, an outsourcing company. In 1967, Warner Brothers would be bought out by Seven Arts Productions and rebranded as Warner Brothers Seven Arts, who would reopen their own animation unit and make Looney Tunes until 1969 when they finally decided that enough was enough and finally closed the studio for good. In 1930, Iwerks left Walt Disney Studio and formed Iwerks Studio with funding from Pat Powers at Celebrity Productions. He would create two series distributed by MGM, Flip the Frog from 1930 to 1933 and Willy Whopper from 33 to 34. In 1934, Hugh Harman and Rudolph Ising, after leaving Warner Brothers, created a new series starring Bosco called Happy Harmonies. However, after two shorts, Harman would redesign Bosco to make him look more realistic. In 1938, Happy Harmonies would come to an end as MGM set up their own in-house studio, MGM Cartoons, headed up by Fred Quimby. The new studio struggled at first, but in 1939, Barney Baird debuted, becoming MGM's first big star. However, the next year, two characters would appear who would make their mark on cartoon history. Tom and Jerry would go on to spawn 114 shorts. In 1942, Tex Avery, after quitting Looney Tunes, arrived at MGM and created Whatever the Heck This Is. In 1957, MGM closed the animation studio down, but due to the immense popularity of Tom and Jerry, MGM hired Gene Deitch and his studio Rembrandt Films from Czechoslovakia to make 13 new Tom and Jerrys. In 1963, Chuck Jones and his studio, Sib Tower 12, were bought by MGM and became MGM Animation slash Visual Arts, who were put to work on, you guessed it, more Tom and Jerry's. In 1967, new Tom and Jerry shorts came to an end as MGM moved to TV.
We are the members of Do It or Die. D-I-D-I-D-I. Watch us make bimbo as easy as pie. D-I-D-I-D-I. We are tough, you bet, filled with college pep. Bring him on, we cry. D-I-D-I-D-I. B-I-M-B-O.
In 1918, brothers Max and Dave Fleischer created Out of the Inkwell to display their inventions, Coco the Clown and the rotoscope. The rotoscope allowed animators to trace over live film. This caused the Out of the Inkwell shorts to be animated more fluidly and realistically than other shorts of the time. Come the 1920s, and Fleischer Studios started experimenting with sound with their screen songs and created more cartoon stars such as Bimbo, Betty Boop, and of course Popeye. Fleischer also experimented with extended shorts like Popeye the Sailor meets Sinbad the Sailor in 1937. In 1939, Fleischer attempted to emulate Snow White's success with Gulliver's Travels, and then again in 1941 with Mr. Bug Goes to Town. However, these endeavors ended up bankrupting the studio, and in 1942, the Fleischers sold their studio to Paramount, who renamed it Famous Studios. Famous would continue to make Popeye cartoons until 1957, and then survived off of Little Lulu until 1967 when Paramount shuttered their animation division. After Charles Mintz's contract with Universal ended in 1929, he would go to Columbia and work on cartoons based on Crazy Cat, which his wife had been doing since 1925. In 1933, the Charles Mintz studio was renamed to Screen Gems. In 1939, Charles Mintz died a few months after he sold Screen Gems to Columbia. Screen Gems would go on to produce many series, but their most popular one, Fox and Crow, I personally feel nobody talks about. In 1946, Screen Gems finally stopped producing black and white cartoons after being the longest holdout of black and white. Later that same year, Columbia decided to close the studio and instead outsource production to UPA, where characters such as Mr. Magoo and Gerald McBoing Boing would be created. In 1957, Columbia's TV division, which was coincidentally also called Screen Gems, made a deal with the new HB Enterprises to distribute their shows until 1967. In 1974, TV Screen Gems went defunct and was renamed Columbia Pictures TV. After the Disney animator strike of 1941, many animators left to create industrial film and poster service. The studio mostly made educational films funded by the government. In 1948, the studio was renamed to United Productions of America and started working with Columbia Pictures as an outsourcing studio. UBA is notable for being the creator of the style of animation that would become known as limited animation. This helped their shorts to be made faster and cheaper than other studios. In 1955, UPA moved to TV with the Gerald McBoing Boing Show. Going into the 60s, UPA made some well-remembered TV specials. However, in 1970, the animation studio was closed permanently. UPA would become a distribution company until it went defunct in 2000.
Get set, get ready. Here comes Hoop and Ready. They're tough but steady, always hoop and ready. They sometimes have their little spats, even fight like dogs and cats. But when they need each other, that's when they're rough and ready.
After MGM shut down their animation division in 1957, Bill Hanna and Joe Barbera created HB Enterprises to create cartoons for TV. Their first show, The Rough and Ready Show, was a modest success, but it was their second show, The Huckleberry Hound Show, that really took off and established Hanna-Barbera as kings of TV animation for years to come. Hanna-Barbera would create such household names as The Flintstones, The Jetsons, and Scooby-Doo. In 1991, Hanna-Barbera was bought by Turner Broadcasting Company and was relegated to making shorts for TBS and the Cartoon Network. In 2001, Hanna-Barbera was absorbed into Warner Brothers Animation after Time Warner's acquisition of Turner.
Guess who?
In 1929, after Charles Mintz's contract with Universal was terminated, Walter Lantz, who served as an animator on Mintz's Oswald shorts, was put in charge of his own studio at Universal. Walter Lantz Productions would make Oswald shorts until 1938, when Lantz would create a new series starring Andy Panda. In the fifth Andy short, Knock Knock, Andy and his dad were paired up against the Crazy Woodpecker. Woody Woodpecker would become a staple of Lance's studio alongside Chilly Willy and Charlie Bear, who would go on to define the studio in its later years. Walter Lantz Studio would survive as the last American animation studio making cartoons for theaters, with the last Woody cartoon, Bye Bye Blackboard, releasing in 1972. In 1930, Paul Terry started up his new animation studio with a bunch of ex-Van Buren animators, and throughout the 30s became known as the cheapest studio in America. So much so that Terry himself said, "Let Walt Disney be the Tiffany's of the business. I want to be the Woolworths." The shorts were distributed first by Educational Pictures, then by Fox Film, and then by 20th Century Fox. In 1942, Terry Toons finally hit it big with Mighty Mouse, then again with Heckle and Jekyll in 46. In 1955, Paul Terry retired, and Terry Toons was sold to CBS, and the man put in charge was none other than Gene Deitch. In 1959, the Deputy Dog Show was created, and the only reason I'm talking about it is because I can. Over the next couple of years, the studio petered out, and in 1973, the studio finally closed its doors.
In 1929, Amedee J. Van Buren parted ways with Paul Terry and renamed his Fable studio to Van Buren Productions. Van Buren would release their cartoons through RKO Radio Pictures. The studio was only around for about 7 years as it was never able to leave a lasting impact. RKO decided to distribute Van Buren's shorts until 1936, when, after an unsuccessful attempt to revive Pat Sullivan and Otto Mesmer's Felix the Cat, RKO terminated their contract with Van Buren and left to go distribute Disney shorts. Republic Pictures was a short lived movie studio that was founded in 1935. In 1946, Republic incorporated a piece of animation by Walter Lantz into Sioux City, a western starring Gene Autry. That same year, Bob Clampett, who had just left Warner Brothers, got to direct one cartoon with the title It's a Grand Old Nag before the company canceled a potential animated series. In 1949, Republic started a new cartoon series called Jerky Journeys. The cartoons were not fully animated, but featured layouts and background designs by Robert Jabarek, Peter Alvarado, and Paul Julian, all of which were from Warner Brothers. Republic discontinued the series after 4 cartoons were made. J. Ward Productions was founded by J. Ward in 1948. In 1950, he created the first cartoon made specifically for TV with Crusader Rabbit. The studio would go on to create the Rocky and Bullwinkle show with characters such as Rocky the Flying Squirrel, Bullwinkle the Moose, and Mr. Peabody and Sherman. The studio is actually still around to this day, making new cartoons with Wild Brain. So, in conclusion, what can we take away from all this? Well, the way I see it, the only thing that we can take away from this is now that we're in 2024, we can finally use Steamboat Willie in public domain.